Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. So welcome, everyone. It is June, the month of June, June 1st, and it kicks off National Family Month. And every first Sunday of the month, Johnny Schaefer is here as a guest co-host on The Daily Show, our Big Blend Daily Show, not The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, though. It'd be fun to have him on the show, wouldn't it, Johnny? Do you want to? It would be fun to have him on the show. But then we'd get into politics, and then that's not a good thing. So we won't go there, right, Glenn? We're going to behave, right? We want to all get along. That's what we want. But so we do the big daily blend show, and it's daily, obviously. But we were looking at Family Month, and Johnny and I had a conversation and said, well, we got to do something on family. Well, let's just do a family fest and put the word out. And literally every single person came back wanting to talk about family history, which is amazing. So apparently this is important, Johnny. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think where we come from influences where we go and how we perceive things and how we navigate life. And so I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's stories and how everything weaves together and blends together.
And some family is adopted into us, and we can choose our family too. So we're going to talk about that today as well. For those who are new to the show, Johnny Schaefer is an award-winning singer-songwriter, and you can keep up with him at hearjohnny.com. So we're going to go around the room and say hi to everyone. First, I'm going to bring Glenn Burrows on the show. He is the owner of Norfolk Tours in England, but he's also a family history expert, a historian, and he takes people on tours to rediscover their family's ancestry. So you take people to actual sites where their ancestors have been, right, Glenn?
Yeah. I mean, that's the most exciting thing because, for instance, last week I had 3 ladies over from Canada, 2 sisters and a friend, and the 2 sisters obviously wanted to see where their ancestors came from. So I was able to take them to lots of little villages around here. And the best bit about it was I found some nice, juicy stories about how one of their ancestors had lots of illegitimate children. And then one of the children ended up in the workhouse. And we were able to actually visit the workhouse where the family were living in the late 19th century. And, all that sort of stuff, bring it all home. And one of the sisters who actually came along as a tag along, she weren't really interested in family history. After we'd had a little conversation in the church that the family were born in, she came up to me and she said, do you know what? She said, you brought a tear to my eye. She said, I didn't know that would be this emotional. And that's what it's all about. Connecting.
That's wonderful. That's the thing when we talk about family history, it's connecting and creating understanding, as well. So everyone, for Glenn, what he does, and he will help you even dig up your family history. I don't like saying that way. It's kind of bad, especially if you're visiting cemeteries and graveyards. But go to norfolk-tours.co.uk, and everyone's website links are in the episode notes, so it's much easier to do that. Our next guest is Julie Magoo. She was on the show with us. When was this now, Julie? It was a few months ago you were on the show?
Probably in January, right before
January.
right before the 3rd book came out.
Yeah, so Julie's written 3 books, and you were on with Twice the Family, a memoir of love, loss, and sisterhood. That's what just came out in February. She's also known for her memoir, Twice a Daughter, A Search for Family, Identity, and Belonging. Her website is juliemagooauthor.com. Again, in the link notes, in the episode notes, I should say. But Julie, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Lisa. I just want to tap into what Glenn said about creating understanding, and that is definitely part of my story. I was late in the game trying to find my biological roots due to a health issue. I had to find my birth mother and birth father, and boy, creating understanding about who I was and even who my children are was the direct result in tapping into that genealogical history. So really grateful to be here and share this conversation. Family history, amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And also coming from a family where you were adopted, right? That is a whole other journey in trying to find your roots. And that's a hard one, isn't it? Because there's been so many weird laws in our world.
Yeah, I was lucky that when I started my adoption search journey that the state of Illinois had changed their adoption statute. So they opened their records. And as easy as that was to access my original birth record, my birth mom had used an alias and my dad's name was not listed. So I had a lot of work cut out for myself and my twin sister. I was adopted with her. So we worked on that together, and it took us 5 years. And one of the key players in that search was a genealogist. She actually went into the city records in Minnesota and pulled everything out, and we determined that the name I thought I was looking for wasn't the right guy at all. So big kudos to genealogists, because they definitely unlock a lot of secrets that are not accessed easily through genealogy sites.
Wow. Yeah. And as Glenn always reminds us all, that whatever you read on Wikipedia is not always true. So you've got to watch out on that too. Joe Clark is also here. Joe Clark is a travel writer and family history researcher who really, really loves to do family history research. I think sometimes 2, 3 in the morning may be happening with her. You can keep up with her at recipiestravelculture.com, and Have Glass Will Travel. So this is not about wine today with Joe, but yeah, family history. You've shared some amazing stories over the last few years with us.
And keep finding more. Always something new to dig up, as you said.
Well, I think, Joe, what's interesting with you too, it kind of goes with Glenn, is that you actually have gone out in search of your ancestors as well, to be in their footsteps, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, it does. Going to Gettysburg a couple of years ago, that was my whole goal, was to ride in the hoof prints of my ancestors who were in the Virginia 38. And I'm going back in July for the reenactment this year. I've never been at the right time for that. I've only been one time, but when I would try to plan a trip, it just never worked out. And this year, been planning this since back in January or February, I guess. So putting it together. We'll be there for the reenactment. I'm excited about that.
Very cool. Well, our next guest is Cherie Cohen, also known as Cherie Claire, or did I give away the wrong name here, Cherie?
Yeah. Correct.
So one part of you is travel writer, journalist. The other part of you is an author of numerous novels, right? And so I want to give everyone that website. Go to CherieClaire.net. Again, all linked in the episode notes. But welcome. So I'm going to call you Cherie, right? Because that's
Yeah.
your name. But your novels are connected to family history, right?
Yes, they are. My father was really into genealogy, and then I love research. So I remember when I was in high school, I'm like, I want to do this with you. And we've been putting family stuff together for years. And so when I came to write my first historical novels, I used some of my ancestors in it. Actually, literally, I threw them in as characters. But you learn so much history when you do your genealogy. At least I wanted to see what they were experiencing, when I found out where they were and, what time period. Because some, not just the wars, but just things that happened in Louisiana. So it was just a natural to kind of include that in my novels, my historical novels.
Okay. How many novels do you have?
I have about 8. No, I can't remember. I have 8 mysteries right now. That's what I'm writing right now. My main character is a travel writer. A lot of travel knows, but my historical novels, I think I had 5. Yes, 5.
So you're not really sitting idle at all, basically. No, not at all. But I love that. And Louisiana, that's really fascinating history too, because of so many people coming from all different places, like Canada, France, all of that influence in there. Have you found any of that history?
I did. The interesting about New Orleans is everybody thinks it's just French. It was actually a big melting pot. It was one of the largest ports for German immigrants, one of the largest for the famine Irish. And then Spain owned Louisiana for almost 70 years. So that's why we have gumbo, because gumbo's got all kinds of nationalities in one pot. So, and that's why I think our food is so good, because it's kind of a blending of cultures. And so I'm a mutt for sure. I include most of those nationalities.
Well, we're coming to have dinner with you. So that's, but as Glenn knows, pizza has to be involved somehow, somewhere. I don't know about a Louisiana pizza yet, but it might be deep fried. Do that. Yeah, exactly.
Crawfish pizza.
A crawfish pie. There it is. There it is. So Kimberly Hess is back on the show. She is the author of A Lesser Mortal, The Unexpected Life of Sarah B. Cochran. And this is a biography of Sarah. And she's also a family history researcher. Her website is Unexpected Life of Sarah B. Cochran. So welcome back. How are you, Kimberly?
Thank you. Well, how are you?
Doing good, doing good. So you got into genealogy. Was it through your own family that led you to Sarah, or did Sarah lead you on like down the rabbit hole?
They were kind of separate and then came together. I had an interest in genealogy starting when I was about 10. So this was about 40 years ago. And that's when I started doing research little by little for my own family and was able to trace back into the 1700s in some cases. Because as far as my family knew, we were in Western Pennsylvania. As far as anyone could remember, we knew certain ethnicities, and that was it. And separate from that, I grew up knowing that I was related to Sarah Cochran because she was my great-great-grandmother's cousin. And there were people in my family who were alive when Sarah was. So we knew that we had that connection. And in the course of doing genealogical research later, I found our common ancestor in New Jersey in the Revolutionary War era. So that was interesting to find that information and then to be able to use that in her biography as part of the prologue.
And you've done some travel through all of this too, also going into footsteps, right?
Yes. So I was actually baptized as a baby in the church that Sarah built, and I had my own daughter baptized there a few years ago as a baby. I had visited the mansion that Sarah built in Fayette County. The Tiffany window that was commissioned for that is now at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So I found myself at the unveiling of that in November of last year. And I've gotten to speak at one of the universities where she was a major donor to talk about her legacy.
And her legacy is that she did a lot of good for a lot of people, and specifically also for women, right?
Yeah, she was a suffragist, and she was also the first female trustee of Allegheny College and a trustee of Beaver College, an American university, and she paid for various people to go to college. So she was a big proponent of education, even though she really didn't have a lot of formal education herself.
Exactly. I want to go over to Diane Dobry is back on the show now. Diane likes to talk about Hungarian wine and talk about traveling through Hungary. She is a travel writer, a family history researcher, and she's writing memoirs right now. You can go to her website, HungarianAquarian.com, and also GettingHungary.com in case you are a little hungry. So welcome back, Diane. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well. It's in upstate New York, and it's going back to winter now. Right now, it's a little chilly, but yeah. So my background with the genealogy, I think my father also was always keeping track of what the family tree was and the family stories. But the weird thing is, I don't know a lot about his family. He didn't really talk too much about it. And the one time I did type up something about his family, I lost the flash drive that it was on. So I'm trying to look up some of his cousins and see if I can get something from them. But on my mother's side, that's where the Hungarian comes in. And I did stories with my grandmother. I had her just sit and record her stories while I was doing the dishes or, making dinner. And so I had all that, and I'm going to publish the transcript of that as a chapbook because she was in Ithaca, New York when she was growing up, and her parents had emigrated in secret from Hungary to the US. And then I inherited my great aunt's diaries from the 1930s when she was from 15 years old to 26, I think. And I'm writing her story called Aunt Marie's Diaries. And Aaron Youngless had read it, and she was very helpful to help me kind of figure out the best way. But my memoirs, that I wanted to do one memoir called Getting Hungry, but I realized that I had like this wine history. I lived there and taught. I went for dual citizenship. I was in a hospital for a while. And I said, there's so many different stories here. There's like the first one was Who's the Pest in Budapest, the domestic diva of Dunakeszi, which is north of Budapest. And then I have the teaching the teachers, because I was teaching at a teaching college, and then the Hungarian wine woman. So trying to put all that together into some kind of format. And I'm the family historian, so I made up a little memoir book of the family. Here's this side of the family, here's that side of the family, here's who's who, here's the background stories, and here's who was related to whom. And I think the most interesting story I heard was my grandfather's grandfather came here to New York at the age of 14 from, I think, Eisenach, Germany. One of the first things he saw was Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession through New York.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Well, I think you bring up something really important as a topic is so many people, whether or not you're a writer, I think everybody on the show here is a writer, in some way. And Johnny, you're a songwriter, but there's writing involved, right? So it's about storytelling and not letting a legacy go away. It's not, so there's a way of capturing it for future generations. And now we have cloud technology. Dan, isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
I hate it when a hard drive goes away. But I wanted to go to Julie with this because you wrote 2 memoirs, but you also did essays. Were the essays what came first for you and actually documenting, did you set out with your books, your 3 books, to educate your family first? Or was it, no, when did you decide that this should be for the world?
Well, actually, it's interesting that you bring that up. I actually started with blogging, created a website and wrote a weekly essay about anything from family to adoption. I kept up the blogging while I was writing the first book, The Twice a Daughter, which was the saga about finding my birth relatives and finding a brother that was literally married to the girl next door. And so blogging through it gave me all this extra material that were, I'm going to say, a companion piece to the memoir itself. I also blogged about what it was like to have my birth mother minimize my sister and I and not introduce us to family members. So there were a lot of little issues that didn't make it into the first book that blogging and publishing essays facilitated a really impactful piece. And those ended up in that second book, Belonging Matters. So it's just a collection of some of my favorite blogs, but also some articles that got published. And then the third book, which just came out, Twice a Family, is really the background history, coming of age memoir, what it was like to be raised as a twin, an identical twin, but also in a family that was made up of half adoptees and half my parents' biological kids. So the two work together, and then the essay sort of accent everything that has happened since.
So everything is very complex in emotions when we get into genealogy. There's some pure joy and complexities, right? Is that part of, because I know you speak around the country too. Do you speak about that, how to handle all of that when people are going to search for their adoptive parents, their biological parents, I should say? Do they, going through those emotions with your books and speaking, are you able to help people kind of stay on the path? Or I know people sometimes want to give up. There's just a lot going on with that to handle. It's
we
a
are
lot.
so fortunate in this day and time to have so many online communities for people to tap into and feel like they are supported and they feel like they belong, that other people understand them on a deep level. So those complicated issues like, who do I belong to? Do I belong to my birth family or do I belong to my adoptive family? Maybe I belong to both. How do I achieve belonging and understanding within both those families? How do I incorporate them together? And those difficult issues are things we talk about on forums, online, things that came out in writing my books that I speak about on podcasts. I think the greater understanding by all the adoption writers that are very prolific right now, which is really good because it's a support system for everybody in the community. It gives everybody a better understanding who's been touched by adoption, but those who have not. And some of the great myths that people ascribe to adoption, that it's this happy thing. Well, it is generally a happy thing that a child has a family, but when you wipe out where they come from completely and deny access to that very essential piece of information about self, then it's not a happy thing. And by talking about it and raising it in the consciousness of society, we can invoke some change and allow people like me access to their original birth records. Because why not? Why shouldn't we know?
Yeah, exactly. I want to go to Johnny on this because Johnny, that's part of it about feeling accepted, right, in families. And I wonder about that with researching family history. I mean, I think Gayla, who's been on the show, that brought her, when she found out about her, was it her aunt, right? Or her grandmother, right? Gayla Turner's an amazing author who found her grandmother's history, like found a box, right, with photographs of her grandmother being in Wisconsin in this little town that was gay. There was like a little gay community, and found out that her grandmother had a woman that they would have been married if they were allowed to. And so it brought her some peace of mind, if you will, right? Some connectivity to not be so alone.
Yeah, she talked about thinking she was the only gay person in her family, and then here was her own grandmother had this beautiful love story, and there was a picture of her grandmother with the woman that she was in love with. The woman was dressed in men's clothing. So at first she had never seen a picture of her grandfather because he left the family very quickly after her mother was born. And so she found these photos, and she says, "Oh, I get to see what my grandfather looked at." And then she realized, well, that's not a man. And so that kind of started the whole thing. And she said that it was very affirming to know that she wasn't alone. I haven't, in looking at my family history, I haven't uncovered anyone that is, because I'm gay myself, and I haven't found anyone that was gay. But I have found out a lot of interesting things. There's lots of music in my family, and also I'm spiritual, and there are a lot of ministers and missionaries on actually both sides of the family going way back. And interestingly, my father was a Lutheran minister, and he went back and forth between wanting to be a teacher or a minister. And I'm the oldest of three boys. One of my brothers is a teacher. The other one sings with LA Opera and teaches music at Cal State Fullerton. And then I've been singing in churches since I was 4 years old, and I've been a cantor for 45 years. And so we all kind of carry on this kind of force that's in our family, that's ingrained in who we are in terms of expressing ourselves as musicians, and also wanting to, and our last name Schaefer means shepherd in German, and to shepherd people, to teach people. And so I've always enjoyed learning more about things that sort of affirm who I've turned into.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing, right? Where you find that connectivity. Glenn, do you see that when you take people and really connect them to their ancestors? And you've had your own experience going to Canada and, setting foot where an ancestor was during the war.
Yeah. Again, these ladies who were over last week, they went. I took them to a village which is where one of their families was sort of based, and they both said, "We feel at home here," and it is really so that you can actually feel at home in the place that your ancestors were at. Whether it's an inherited memory, what it is, or whether it's just a bit of woo, like your family is like, Lisa, you're a load of old witches, aren't you? So, I mean, is it all to do with that, or is it in your blood? Who knows whether it is? It doesn't really matter what it is, but it's still there.
Mm.
And yes, I went to Halifax in Nova Scotia because one of my distant ancestors, he was British, obviously, and he went over to fight in the 1814, 1815 Canadian-American War. And I went to Nova Scotia because that's where he was. He came back again to England. So, or else I wouldn't have been here. So, it is a connection that I actually went there because he went there. And it was great to feel that I was walking in the same streets as he did. As I've been brought up in a village. In fact, my mum still lives in the same village that her ancestors have lived in since the early 1600s. And, when you consider that when I used to open my bedroom curtains in the morning, I was looking at the church where my ancestors had got married in 1620. That is a real connection to the land. I am part of that land.
Wow, that's another thing. Yeah. I was going to look at Kimberly, and here she's written about an ancestor, Sarah. And I think even, you've gone around doing speaking, you've published a book about her. you do podcasts, not just with us, you do all, and even, I love following you on LinkedIn, and I know you're on Instagram too, but it's just, you tend to have to create a awareness of strength for women. And I feel like, I always, once in a while I'll go, look what Kimberly just did. She's being Sarah, but even though you're Kimberly, you know what I mean? I just go like, you're doing it in your own way. Like, do you feel that at all with her? Like, do you feel like you're kind of taking this other step of the modern times of what she's done?
At times, I think my mother's family is very much like that. I think my mother and her family made me the type of person who would be Sarah at times. Yeah, I think at this point, it's important to talk a lot about her and to find different ways to make her relevant to other people because her story is still relevant today, but also to show other people who are involved in genealogy how critical they can be to identifying these people that might not be part of the historical narrative and bringing them back to places where other people can learn about them. I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. And there's also a tremendous opportunity for us to bring women from history back as well in that way.
I think that's, Diane, look what you're doing. It's that connective of writing and putting it out there for the world. Joe, for you, are you finding some of your personal who you are through the research that you've done in your ancestors? Not asking, you're not going to war. I'm going to hold you back on doing that. You're not going, but you can travel anywhere you want, but not for that.
Yeah, there've been teachers in the background. And I taught for a lot of years in the college and high school and even middle school. Yeah. I found my grandmother with 11 children would go, and I guess now she would be paid and she would be a classroom aide, but she would go and help Miss Sally, the teacher at the one-room school, and she would go and help the other children. She may have been going out of guilt because half of them were hers. I don't know. There's nobody left to ask about that idea. But I had no idea that my grandmother, Mama's mama, I had no idea that she was a teacher or wanted to be a teacher and helped in the schools. My mother was a seamstress. She made her own doll clothes from the time she was about 3 years old. She started making doll clothes, and she was quite a talented seamstress. That skipped right on over me. I made one dress a year. Yeah, that was my requirement. I couldn't start going to the pool in the summer until I had made a dress. Sometimes it was the middle of July before I could go to the pool. Suck at sewing,
Yeah.
I could cut it out and put it together one time. But then when it didn't fit and you had to start adjusting, the fun's gone. The challenge is that's not for me. I don't want to fix things. I want it to fit the right fit.
I sewed pants and I sewed my pants closed because I tried to hem them and I suddenly couldn't, that was and then I went to dresses. I went, that's it. So sew it all down one side and that's that. We're done. That's it,
I sewed something to something I was wearing one time because as I leaned over and, something kind of laid across and I sewed right on through, and I sewed into my finger one time because I was
okay. Well, there.
I was
I'm going to write a book about Joe's sewing adventures. Was the wine in this part of it or no?
I was a teenager. There was no wine. My drinking was limited to Christmas Eve eggnog.
Okay. All right. I want to go to Cherie here. So Cherie, what have you found in your family that connects with you?
Well, it's funny what Glenn said about going to Nova Scotia, because I went to Nova Scotia for the opposite side, because that's where the Acadians came from, who came into Louisiana and became Cajuns. So I went up there to do research on some novels, my historical novels, and also to do travel stories. So I was wearing both hats at the same time. But it was fascinating because you read about all this and then you go there and it's so different because, once the British took over, it became, or the Scottish, it just became different. And so you can see the little bits of French there, and not quite like Louisiana, which has a lot more of it. But yet these people looked exactly alike. I thought, you could take someone from South Louisiana, stick them in the Acadian section, and they look like cousins. Well, they are cousins, but it was very interesting to me how a group of people separated like that. And it made a great story.
Oh, wow. But it's also talking about the history part. I mean, we're looking at family history, but I also think family history teaches us history itself. And that's what I wanted to touch on. Like, you may have gone to school and not done well in history, but in research, did we start learning things like, I didn't know this was invented then, and I had a family member who did it. Julie, for you, did you get into any history that you maybe, I mean, I know we didn't talk about history at all other than, you searching for, your birth parents, but did you learn any actual history in these, delves of researching?
Absolutely. When I found out who my birth father and birth mother were, it turned out that on my father's side, I'm Native American Chippewa, and that was a whole new aspect to figure out. And in all the research, I learned all about northern Minnesota, how a lot of white Europeans intermarried with the American Indians. A lot of it had to do with and trading those furs back through Canada and into Europe. So I learned a lot about family history, but also the backdrop of what it was like in the early part of our country. And then when I wrote the third book, Twice the Family, I had really no intention other than to write this backstory to the first memoir. And one of my kids finished the book and she said, well, now we don't have to interview you about family history. It's all right here in this book. So in writing that book, I had to go back and remember, nostalgia pieces. What was it like growing up in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and revisiting that time culturally and historically was a really, really fun thing to do. We were the generation that had a lot of Swanson TV dinners because that felt like a treat on Friday nights.
With the tin foil.
Lots of tinfoil and Salisbury steak. That was one of the favorites. But also the rules were different back then in that era of our country. We didn't come home till the streetlights came on, and my mom rang a bell. There was no cell phones and texting. Where are you? Really? If you heard your mom calling for you, you skedaddled home because you were going to get in trouble otherwise. So the rules have changed. The times have changed. Play outside was definitely something that was emphasized in our family. You were outside unless it was pouring down rain. So I think sharing those stories about what family history was like for us before this new generation of kids and grandkids, they have no idea some of the things that we grew up experiencing. We went from black and white TVs to computers all in our lifetime. And it's really fun to look at that, research it, and tell stories around it.
Yeah, I think about, the generations where they saw the man go to space for the first time. My Nana thought it was a hoax. She was one of the first conspiracy theorists. She just was like, it didn't happen, and then phones were coming, I hear stories about how she just thought all of it was hooey and didn't exist. She just was one of them, and then, it's just when you think about how long people live through things. I was just doing a interview about, and everyone can hear it in the archives about, and you're going to know this, Joe, because you went there. It was about Glenn Curtis, and his connections in upstate New York to Coronado, flight and military and everything. And the lady I was talking to, Chris Martin, she was talking about, if you look at the Wright brothers who invented flight, like as airplanes. One of them died early. The second one stayed all the way, lived till almost like 90 or 100. I'm going to be wrong on the dates. But they saw things in their life. Just the history of flight. One person gets to see, here's our airplane, like the little ding, 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 we're going to go up there. And I'm going, are you nuts?
You started.
Yeah, look what you started. And now we have these massive airplanes. And so when we look back on our family history, we've got to think how much change people have gone through, and change takes time. People are against change, and we have to also have a forgiveness, or maybe not an understanding, get to an understanding that what we may think is wrong today was how it kind of was at that time, right? So it's kind of, I don't know if the word is forgiveness. I don't know what the right word is, but maybe some empathy, understanding, stuff. There's perspective. There you go. It's not necessarily I don't want to say, when we look at some of the really terrible things we've done in history, like slavery is a good one. How do you handle that if your family was a slave owner? How do you handle that? part of, how do you move forward? Glenn, do you have any perspective on that, on the forgiveness side of it?
I look at it as accepting. I have to accept what it was like. Yes, people owned slaves, but that was what happened. People used to do cockfighting. People used to keep people locked up for nothing. People used to send people to Australia for stealing a handkerchief. Well, that is what happened. I can't change history. I cannot change yesterday. All I can do is change today. So I don't do that today. My great, we were talking about this for the other broadcast we did. My great uncle was killed by the Japanese. A lot of people from England and other countries were taken prisoner by the Japanese during the Second World War and treated like dirt. Worse than that, as bad as you can possibly imagine. They've been talking about it recently that we as a country want an apology from Japan for how they treated our people. What on earth is the point of that? What is the point of some person in 2025 apologizing for something that happened in 1943? It's totally pointless. There's no good. All we have to do is learn from it and, just accept people today for what they are. My dad used to hate Japanese people. I mean, I don't hate Japanese people because they've done nothing to me. It might have been their grandfathers who did, but I just have to accept who we are today. And I think that's the secret. It's about acceptance.
Acceptance and not doing the same thing. Yeah, we don't need to do that, right? That's the learning part. Diane, have you gone through any of that in your research of family, of having to go, oh boy, I didn't know this part?
Yeah, there's a few things that I found out about with my great aunt's diaries. She was always, from when I knew her as a child, when I was a child, and we would go visit her at Christmas or something. She kind of reminded me of Phyllis Diller. She was a little quirky and trying to make jokes and say, things in a real kind of show-offy, hammy way. And reading her diary, what a difference. I wish she would have shared it with me when she was alive, because I'm reading it now. She went through the depression, but not only that, her mother had a mental illness, and she was the daughter who would try to cheer up her mother and take care of her. And her father lost his business in the depression. He had all kinds of tire companies around New York and Queens and Brooklyn. And in the diaries, it's like she loses her job, can't get a job. He's getting his property taken away. Her mother's going through a deep depression and finally ends up in an asylum. And she was in love with a man who, right after he met the family, he got kind of ghosted her. So she was just, every day just felt so bad for her. I never knew this about her. Yet she was so like, okay, I'm going to keep on going. I'm going to keep on going. And I keep thinking, like, what is the universal message in this story that I can bring to an audience? I think, it really is like everybody kind of goes through a dark night of the soul at some point. And it's, in one page in her book, she says, my mother was home and I just had enough, and I turned on the gas and was going to put my head in the oven, and my mother stopped me. And that was the only time I saw her in the story, in the diaries, that she didn't have like some kind of a hopeful attitude. And she just was getting a little bit taken, like everything was going wrong all at once, and her resilience wasn't there. But I knew her in her old age, and she never had children, but she always had a exciting life, and she was always, giving us like little stories about her life. So I learned a lot from the diaries, and I'm a big diarist too. I have diaries from when I was 10. So I keep telling my kids, save the diaries. I don't care. Throw everything else out when I'm gone, but save the diaries. And then my son said, well, can you summarize it for us? 50 something years of diaries. And I said,
Run through AI for everybody.
well, I said, well, people do buy diaries on eBay. If you really don't want to read it, just sell them. You'll probably get a good price for 50 something years of diaries.
That's amazing. I want to go. I love the fact that you talk about resiliency and the lessons to learn. Johnny, have you found any lessons in your family?
I have.
Since they're all teachers and priests and missionaries, I mean, we got some dark history through all of us somewhere, but you've got the angel family, you know?
I feel like the universe shows us things to look at in ourselves if we pay attention. And when I see something that upsets me, I try to ask, where is that in me? And I think genealogy can help that from a really deep level. And I found that I have relatives from Poland and Germany who were Jewish, and then others who were Nazis. And so both of those dynamics were part of my family history. And so both of those things are in me. And Glenn, I don't want to at all discount your point earlier, but I will say one time I was in a room with a bunch of people, and the facilitator talked about, there were Jewish people, and there were people whose family had been slave owners, and there were Black people, and there were people whose families have been, I'm sorry, there are people who had been Nazis. So everyone was all in the room. And she spent about an hour going through this process where people just did apologize, like on behalf of their ancestors. And all I can say is that there wasn't a dry eye in the room. People were sobbing, and it did feel very cathartic to me, because I think if we carry those things on some level, even if it's subconsciously, healing can come about by just talking things through. And I think sometimes we there was the book, The Celestine Prophecy, where he talked about we kind of heal. Sometimes we have an opportunity to heal our parents' conflicts, like we inherit them, and then we can either carry them forward or we can heal them so that we can move on collectively, I guess. So I don't know, that's for me, just looking at those things in myself and saying, wow, all those things were in me. And so it can help, it sort of helps me navigate things now when I look and see, okay, there were people in my family who were like this person or like that person. And so by acknowledging that in myself, it sort of gives me a window to try to approach people with more empathy and try to start with, okay, that's where you're at now, and maybe we can find a way in, to talk to each other and open up some dialogue.
Yeah. Glenn, do you have a comment for that in regards to? I think it's how it's done. I think when politicians go, we're going to do this. I mean, at this point, I think we're all just tired of politicians. So maybe that's what it is, Glenn. But I think when in that kind of setting, it's a little different than I think what you're talking about, or no.
Well, the lovely thing about this is that we can all be in a room and we can all discuss things about how we feel and about the experiences that we've had. And I mean, the hollow apologies that you get from politicians are about as much use as a chocolate teapot, so
that's a good one.
If you've got a real heartfelt apology from somebody to say, I am sorry that this happened, then that's a different cup of tea, because it's a real heartfelt feeling. But it's the hollow apologies that don't mean anything to anybody that I just object to. But
Exactly.
I love about this type of thing where we're all sitting in a room. We're not all sitting in a room together, but we are virtually. And we can all talk about stuff. And, I'm not going to fall out with anybody who disagrees with me. And, it's just that we've all got our own experiences to bring to the table. That is what make a really good discussion and a really good, comfortable world to live in, that we can all just get on with each other.
Agreed. I wanted to go to Julie on this, especially going from searching for your biological parents and anyone that is on that side, wanting to know who that is, and sometimes finding their biological parents, and it may not be something that it could be a very not a positive thing, right? In that kind of journey. So this kind of sometimes you don't get that apology, maybe.
You don't. And I think when it goes to searching for birth relatives, you don't know what you're walking into. A good analogy is to attend a movie when it's half over. You're lost about a lot of the family history or the things that come that precede the actual situation you're walking into. And I think one of the things that I learned a great deal about, and which goes back to history, is, the times that birth mothers went through back in the 50s and 60s. There was so much societal shame that was heaped upon them. The fear of being found out, the fear of family members disowning them. Women did not work after they had a baby. They stayed home. I mean, that was what society was doing. So imagine an unwed mother trying to parent and keep a household going. So those kinds of things, learning about them and then sharing about them, was very mind-opening. And we've come a long way as a society when it comes to how we treat people that choose to be a single parent household, whether it's their child or adopting. And I appreciate the fact that we've come a long way. I think society understands that we should have access to every bit of information that affects us and not close that off to certain individuals. Back to the point about apologizing for family history. Having found out that I'm Native American, and I think one of the reasons that that was a secret was there's some embarrassment about how we treated Native Americans in this country, taking away their homes, putting them on reservations, very similar to what we did with Japanese Americans, putting them away, putting the problem somewhere else. So there is so much to, forgiving our country, but forgiving people in our past that might have been associated with some of the societal shame and blame that we have done.
Yeah, I agree. Cherie, what about for you in going in your family history? Does it help to write a historical novel and get it, sometimes maybe move it over there or write a mystery, in these kinds, because it's tender. Genealogy can be absolutely magical as we talk. But those tender lessons, and there's some beautiful lessons. Like I think what Diane was talking about, with her aunt, that's a beautiful story about a woman that shows resilience that, I'm going to remember that story at times,
Yeah, I've always been fascinated. There's one person in my family that I've never been able to find anything on, and her name was Mary McKernan, and she's the only Irish person in my line, even though my son has slightly red hair. So obviously her influence is being felt, but I could never find out where she came from. She came into New Orleans and married a Frenchman, and she ended up being my grandfather's grandmother. So I just loved her, though, and I know she fled the famine. So I read a lot about it, and which is just absolutely heartbreaking. So I put that into a story, and I used what she experienced in a novella called Chase and Katie. But it felt like I was reliving her steps and finding strength in it, hoping that she lived that kind of life, that she came to America and did well. I hope that she did. You really don't know. They married and had children, but especially women, you don't know a lot about what they went through.
Yeah, in research, let's go to you, Joe. In research, are you finding more about the men than the women? Did we get a fair shake?
The men are easier to track for sure. Lots of times you get to especially going back 100 years or more, you get to birth certificates or death certificates, and it'll say name of mother, Sarah. Thank you. Sarah who, it was a popular name. You have to really, really work to find the women, and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to jump back a generation too. You start looking at, you learn the ways that things were done, like naming conventions. The first child is named for the father's father. Second child is named for the mother's father. You start going back, and that was how I finally found one of mine, was that my great grandfather's middle name was Farmer. And I had couple of cousins saying, well, that was because the family had all been farmers. And I went, nobody was named because they were farmers.
That's funny.
That might have been a last name back when it got started, but that wasn't his middle name because they had a farm. And I finally found his grandmother was Elizabeth Farmer before she married. But it took ages and ages to find that. The women, even in family Bibles, it's like, especially if it was kept by the paternal side, it would have the full name. And then the woman that married that man, you had that last name, but her last name and her parentage was just sort of glossed over or skipped completely. So, yeah, it's hard.
Oh, wow. I was going to say,
That's part of the challenge.
yeah. I mean, Kimberly, I mean, you wrote about Sarah. Her name was well known, right?
Yes.
So did that make it a little easier because she did these certain things that really impacted the communities? She had like newspaper clippings and things like that. It was a little different.
Historic newspapers tended to be the best source of information about her. What I found was that I would really appreciate it if people who have artifacts about her or her family would donate those to museums and archives so that researchers can find that information, and not just for her, but for anybody. I think there's a certain point when you look at some of the documentation that you have in your files of genealogical materials and you realize it's not doing you that much good there. You don't take it out and look at it much, and no one else knows that it exists if it's sitting in even the best acid-free archival box in your house. So it really has to be shared with the world at a certain point. But I think in her case, there was an absence of information because we didn't have a diary or very many letters. We found one letter that had been kept over years, but historic newspapers were the best sources. And then colleges that published information about her contributions were a good source too. And there was just quite a bit of the philanthropy that she was involved with was considered quiet philanthropy, that it was done and people knew about it by now because they knew that an ancestor was put through college or was given a musical instrument because of her. But nobody kept records of any of that for any reason.
Well, in closing, I wanted to ask each of you if you could go anywhere in the world that you haven't been yet, or maybe you want to go back to. Let's just do that. You want to go back to or go to research more on a relative. Where do you want to go? Since I know you all travel on this show, I know you all do in some way enjoy travel, and you all write. So let's start with you, Cherie. Are you going to go to New Orleans?
No, I'll be going home soon. I live in Atlanta now, but
Yeah.
I still have family there. I'd like to go to Alsace-Lorraine because I have an ancestor who fled that area because, according to the newspaper article, he killed a Prussian soldier who insulted his daughter. And I don't know what that means. And I'd really like to know. Sounds pretty,
Wow.
I know.
Wow. This is amazing. So everyone, I'm going to read off everyone's websites, but again, it's linked in the episode notes. So you can go to CherieClaire.net, and that's Claire with the CLAIRE, but it's all in the episode notes. So let's go up to you, Johnny. Where do you want to go?
Well, I love Europe, and a big part of my family is from Poland, and I haven't been to Poland yet, so I think I'd like to go there. And as a musician, one thing that was interesting for me is when I married my husband Paco, who's from Mexico, I noticed a big similarity in like the local, the banda music, to the polka music that my grandparents loved. And I found out that the Germans they helped build the transportation system in Mexico. So there were a lot of Germans that went there and brought all those instruments, the tubas and everything that you see in a mariachi band, the trumpets. And so I would love to kind of explore the musical history, in Poland and relate that to where things have gone for me as a musician.
That's fascinating. Now, in certain parts of Texas, you'll hear norteño music, and that brings in the Mexico and the German music, and I like it. I like it. Yeah, everyone, you go to hearjohnny.com and check out his music there, and it's beautiful music, really, and also on YouTube, he's there. So, Diane, where do you want to go? Is she going back to Hungary? Where are you going?
Well, I went to London and York for the first time in 2023, and I loved it. Loved being in England, and I don't know much about my father's family. My father was English and Irish, so I'd love to go to the UK and just find out, whatever I could find out and just enjoy and drink it in, and maybe I'll have to call Glenn up.
I think, Glenn,
Arrange.
can she knock on your door?
Any day, just pop round. I'll have the kettle on.
There it is. Yeah, and he might give you a Mr. Whippy. It worked.
Okay.
Mr. Oh my gosh, that is brilliant. Mr. Whippy is a soft serve ice cream cone in England. And if
Okay.
you pay, I don't know now
Sure
if it's
it
99
is.
pence, it's got a chocolate flake in like, which is a candy bar thing, and you put it in. Anyway, we talk about Mr. Whippies all the time, but I didn't expect that reaction from half of you, but that was pretty good. So Glenn, where do you want to go?
Well, as I said, my mum's family has lived in the same village since at least 1620. So I want to go back there in 1620 just to see what it was like. Even though I
Back in
lived there
time.
until I got married, and my mum still lives there. I want to go back to 1620 to see what it was like, and also ask my ancestors where they came from because I don't know.
So he's back in the time machine. He always does that. Everyone, norfolk-tours.co.uk. And again, is the website for Glenn. For Diane, you can go to hungarianaquarian.com and also gettinghungary.com. So I want to go over to you, Joe. Where are you going to go for your family? I know you're going to Gettysburg, but where's next?
See, Glenn, I'm going to take my long list because I'm 67% English and all the rest is the British Isles, Irish and Welsh. So I want to take my list and say, okay, in 1607, when they came to Jamestown from this place in England, where is that? And why did they leave? I think I know. I think they were, the majority of mine, I think, were second or third sons, and the first son was going to inherit everything. So what the heck? Might as well go to America.
Glenn, are we going to have a big blend bus go to England?
Well, that would actually be a good idea, wouldn't it? I can drive a 17-seat minibus, so I could fit you all on. So that'd be fine.
Take it from there.
Yeah.
Go
Okay.
for it.
Well, let's do it. Let's do it. So everyone, for Joe Clark, go to recipes.travelculture.com or have Glasswell Travel. And she is on Big Blend Radio every second Sunday. Glenn is every fourth Saturday. Kimberly, for you, where do you want to go?
I would love to go to a town in Lower Saxony in northern Germany called Lautenthal, and it's where my third great grandmother was born. And none of us knew this. I was able to get her actual decorative marriage certificate when a relative passed away and he had had this in his house. So that's how I know where she was born. There's a gap in the church records that are digitized and accessible. I think I really do have to go there to get into records or work with someone there. And it would be fun to see the town. And who knows how long the family had been there.
And who knows if another book may come out, So keep up with Kimberly. Again, her book is A Lesser Mortal, The Unexpected Life of Sarah B. Cochran. You can go to unexpectedlifeofsarahbcochran.com and learn more there. But I want to go over to you, Julie, in closing. Where do you want to go?
Well, a lot of my relatives came through Quebec, and I've not ever been there. I think that would be a fascinating place to visit. There's so much genealogy there, repository. So I'd love to go to Quebec and then go down through northern Minnesota and see where some of my Native American relatives ended up and the impact that they had on those communities.
Wow. See, through this one show, we all could be related. Just saying, because there's
You're
connections.
Hungarian, right, Lisa?
Yeah, we've got Hungarian, German, Austrian, English, Isle of Man, Paiute, which our family doesn't want to agree about because, yeah, Shanae. And apparently one of the German side married a Paiute lady, and that's a big hush-hush. This did not exist in our family. And I'm like, I saw a photo of a Paiute warrior in a book that I have, and I look almost 100% identical. We talk about identical twins. It's like, but he's a boy and I'm a girl. So there you go. But that didn't, I mean, it's just a little, that's the only difference, So it's interesting how we can all connect on that. But everyone, Julie's website, go get her books as well. You can go to juliemcgooauthor.com. So a lot of authors on the show, lots to dig into. Please visit the episode notes to click through to everyone's websites and get to know them better and find out if you're related to them. So thank you all so much for joining us on the show. It's always so fascinating, and it makes me always think whenever we do these shows. It just makes me always kind of think for a while. I don't know about you, but it just makes me think a lot more about things. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
And everyone
Bye.
behave so that we don't have to apologize for the next, generation. Yeah. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.